Hello. This is day 4 of the GDC vlogs 2024. Okay, this is gonna be some housekeeping. This is gonna be a little weird because this is the first vlog where it's actually not at midnight because there wasn't a party. And frankly, I don't want to go to one anyway because I want to rest, but also there's some work I want to do now that I want to prepare for tomorrow and see if I can have some way to show people. Basically tomorrow, I want to work on my resume for tomorrow. For reasons we'll get into later. I did go to some talks, not that many. I skipped one that didn't seem interesting because I was, well, we'll get into why. I'll start from the beginning though. I'll go through all the talks, then we'll go back for the day, engaging with everything that wasn't the talks. So, the first talk I went to, Alan Wake 2, Path Tracing. That's not, the full title is something else, but that's the gist of it. Basically, it's an example of real-time path tracing, similar to Cyberpunk, though the implementations are a little different. Because Cyberpunk has indirect global illumination built into it in a different way than Alan Wake does. But both are using real-time path tracing, which is insane. And the big thing that's really driving both of them is DLSS. And for those of you who don't know, DLSS is basically a machine learning system that figures out how and predicts how to generate or fill in pixels in an image. So given a noisy image with holes, fill in the holes and denoise it. And get rid of the artifacts. Make it look like it's supposed to. And it's really good given the current path tracing algorithms, which are Reister. It's based off some big papers that I already talked about yesterday. The big differences here is that first off, they deal with a lot of vertex compression. They have a lot more foliage. They actually are in a very opposite environment to Cyberpunk. So while Cyberpunk just had physical solid surfaces, they didn't have a lot of foliage, which is really important because if you're in a forest with a lot of small detailed objects, that's going to be difficult to render. And so they use foliage, which they test by comparing opacity, which could have a lot of overdraw, which you prevent by basically baking in properties which tell you, should you draw this bit? Is this bit actually visible? And you just get rid of it. So you don't even do the work at all. It's a whole complicated process of building these OMMs, opacity, material, something. I know it's opacity MM, but I don't know what the MMs mean. I unfortunately didn't seem to write it down. But yeah, they use a bunch of vertex compression also because they're doing a lot of detailed geometry to save on performance. They're using some deferred rendering, it seems, for their system. They have to do a lot of stuff to construct how your bounding boxes for ray trace hits. So they have a bunch of tricks with that. They use a similar fallback system. Basically, because they're working with NVIDIA, like with Cyberpunk, the approaches are overlapping. And also they're using a paper, like a similar the same paper, I believe, a Reister. But they're having these other approaches to deal with their specific use case, which is detailed forests and a really dense vertical city. And that's really the gist of it. Very interesting. One of the more popular ones, but difficult. The next one is called Virtualized Geometry, made by Virtuous Studios. I don't know exactly what Virtuous does in general. I believe they're actually a support studio, or they make, I think they actually either they make their own games or a support studio, but they have an R&D division and they worked on what's called Virtualized Geometry. And basically, something that's been cropping up throughout these graphics talks is methods for trying to compress and minimize the memory usage of geometry so it runs faster and is more optimal. We have mesh shaders with AMD, and we have some of the talks have met that has a bunch of compression to it, and then we have this virtualized geometry, which is exactly what it sounds like. You're taking a new method of encoding which limits space, and part of the benefit for both of these systems that they want to do is they want something called, they want per sub-object LOD. So basically, normally in rendering, we have a bunch of objects and we have different versions of the models that we replace them with as they get further away. And in some instances, this is fine. It's exactly what we want. We don't need to worry about this any further. However, in some other instances, this is actually not great, because if you have a really high fidelity mesh with a bunch of triangles and a bunch of vertices, and you look up on a big one, well, excuse me, well, that's still a lot of triangles. You can't lower the OLD, you're too close. So it's just gonna look worse in a very obvious way. So it's just no good way to save space without sacrificing fidelity, unless you do something clever. You break down the mesh into parts. And then you simplify those parts. So you change which triangles you're drawing and how you're drawing it, and simplifying it when it's further away. And as it gets closer to the triangles are more and more detailed. In theory, I imagine there's a reason, like this sounds like a tessellation shader. However, I imagine there are very good reasons that tessellation shaders you can't really recreate this effect with them. I suspect, because tessellation shaders are situational, they're not super common. Meanwhile, these sound way more useful, way more general, because LOD in AAA high fidelity projects is super important because you want nitty-gritty detail. So the ability to encode these meshes into parts that you can minimize and not just reduce the complexity in memory usage, but also have it so you can have a lot of triangles and vertices rendered, but have it so it's not overwhelming the system by basically switching which triangles you're using, and even doing things like per sub-object culling, where triangles are just eliminated if you can't see them. And the way to do it is they basically do this whole system of making a tree that tells of chunks, essentially, of vertices, which they can then learn to switch out at runtime, which they do offline, this whole system. And at runtime, they use compute shaders to find the relevant IDs and edit the clusters, which are the collections of chunks in a model. And all of this was done independent of any specific engine. That was the idea. So they make it a bunch of libraries, and then they have a team to go into an engine and add the engine specific bits to it. But most of it is independent, which is really cool because it means that you can use this system for all sorts of tools that you might otherwise be unable to use. Something that was brought up, like the first question immediately asked was, how do you compare this to nanite? In fact, it was phrased like, look, this is the elephant in the room, how does it compare to nanite? And nanite, I think, based on context and some of these talks and what people are saying, this is what nanite does. It's a tool used to virtualize geometry such that you can have high fidelity objects and still have very fine-tuned level of detail, so that you can have best of both worlds, performance with high fidelity meshes. And the answer is they have not compared yet, but they are working on other things like geomorphing, where you get smooth transitions between two LOD states, and they're working on foliage as well. That's about it. Pretty interesting. Makes me think about if this is different from mesh shaders, or if they're related, or could you implement it with mesh shaders? The final talk I went to, because I skipped one, which was going to be about tools, and integrating. It was about integrating Havoc engine into Unreal, and I just was not interested enough to stop whatever I was doing and go to it. So my final talk today was getting a job with personal touch. And a lot of this is advice that I'm already kind of aware of. Like there's some obvious stuff in here, like don't make a bad first impression. And, so avoid copy pasting stuff. And, but then there's other things like, don't lie. But then there's other things where it's like, hey, show that if you demonstrate that you care and have done the work, I might be more interested as a hiring manager. That's what he said. And don't be too early and stuff like that. Basically, the main takeaway I have from this is I need to accept that investing in a good cover letter is good. Cover letters and actually do matter, and trying to shotgun your way to success is a terrible idea, because and also curate your resume better, which is something I want to do today, because my resume is laughably terrible in some ways, especially for someone who's been working at this job for 3 years and now has actual projects that I can point to and talk about. So we're gonna be redoing my resume to cut out what's from the more fillery bits and focus on the stuff that I really want to sell people on now. So I think that's gonna be something I'm gonna do basically right after this. I think spend an hour or two just going through my resume. But yeah, a lot of this is it's all good advice. And it's clear that the guy in question, he hires a lot of entry-level people. That's what he says specifically. He says an indie studio that hires entry-level people, which is kind of wild. I never heard of that. But the thing it tells me, the main thing is, it got me to think about is putting more effort to think about things from the employer's perspective, which is something I think I have been failing to do for the few times I've dipped into the hiring process. So I'm actually glad I went to this, even though it's filled with stuff that is kind of obvious in hindsight. It confirms things and just makes me more comfortable with just sitting down and committing to investing in an application process, which I think might be frustrating to my parents, who have already told me this advice before because they both have dealt with hiring. So better late than never, and that's it. I have some talks tomorrow related to career advice, but like I'm putting my actual job hunting bits first. So portfolio review is happening at the uni booth, which is basically almost all day except for lunch, which sounds like it will give me plenty of time, but given I want to go to talent acquisition and I don't know how full that's going to be, I'm unsure. And the portfolio reviews are 15 minutes, which doesn't sound that bad, but when you put that in perspective, 15-minute portfolio interviews, you don't know how much space there is. It's not going to be how much, how much parallel space. That's actually a really limited number, like only 4 per hour over the course of 5 hours. Because it ends at 3. So that's like 20 out of hundreds. Like, it's one of those situations where you gotta, of course, you're assuming everyone's taking the most amount of time possible, but you see what I'm getting at. I want to get there early. I might skip the talk I was planning to go to. I might go, I'm hemming and hawing a little bit. I think the plan I'm gonna do is squeak it in the morning, like at the very beginning. And if I go over, I'll just go to the talk anyway and be a little late, which is fine. It's 30 minutes long, so being late matters a little more, but I can catch up later, so it's not the end of the world. It should release from the vault. Rewinding back through the day though, I mentioned I skipped the talk because I was busy. Well, after the Alan Wake talk, I decided to go visit the board game lounge out of curiosity, and also because I thought that might be a good way to meet more people. That wasn't quite true because I played a long game that's best 2 players, and one of those players I didn't interact with very much outside of that. So kind of a bust, frankly. But I don't regret it though. It was fun. We played a game called The Beast. You're 2 hunters trying to kill a beast, and the beast is hiding and moving around without our knowledge, and there's like bits of breadcrumbs that let us track it down and hunt down the beast. It's hard for the hunters because there's a level up system, and it's easier for the beast to start snowballing faster than the hunters. And the hunters need to basically, I think part of the problem was the other guy I was with, I was the seer. My job was just keeping track of information and revealing information, which I think I did an okay job of threatening the beast. Our trapper person, I think, had a really good move of putting a watchtower, which let us see the movements and corner the beast better, the beast player. But the problem was they struggled to really follow up with anything as impactful as that. Because they were built all around traps, but traps are situational and weird. It's all about revealing the beast in certain terrain. So it's more situational. The result is that he was more frustrated than I was because he felt like he couldn't do anything and the game was hard. And I never really quite caught his name. I read his badge. He's from NYU. He was actually a panelist for the IDF, the Independent Games Festival. So he was with the New York Times, I think, or NYU. But I didn't really speak to him. I spoke to Timothy, who is the Beast, and he made a game, a submarine game. I spoke with him briefly. We're gonna play the card game. This is Timothy's business card. So, afterwards, after all the talks were done, and I played the Beast for basically most of my late morning, noon time, was mostly spent playing the Beast, which maybe a little longer than I would have liked, but I'll be honest, I already was kind of struggling to figure out what to do on the expo floor for a while. What I ended up doing was I didn't want to go to places I've already been to extensively. Like, I avoided the IDF area because I already went there a lot yesterday talking to the Cocoon people. I exhausted that resource. We're not tapping that twice. Okay, we're done. Leave them be. So I instead went to other places. I went to the Brazilian, I keep getting insane. The Chile booth to talk to Sven and co briefly just to say hi. That was nice. Seems like they've managed to, they've been getting publisher interest with their game, or both games. Both groups have been getting publisher interest. I believe that they all work together. I'm unclear exactly if, I think the situation is all of them are working on one game, but Sven also is working on a separate game for a separate company. I think. The relationship, I still haven't researched that thoroughly, but I believe that's what's happening because they seem to be working together. At the very least, they're friends, so I know they're friends, so I don't think the exact business relationship doesn't really matter, but either way, both groups look like they're getting publisher buzz, which is nice. I also decided to speak with some Unity people for my job, for reasons, which I won't get into. Sorry. But after that, I went to look at Keyword Studios and learn more about what's going on with them. And I learned that they're basically a support company. They're the biggest game studio you've never heard. Mainly because they're very prolific, but what they do is very thankless, and easily overlooked. So they're more of a background player in the game space, but nonetheless important. They have a bunch of roles open. which I am curious about, like including graphics, like including rendering programmer and technical artist. And I am interested in both. I'm going to look over both descriptions, and I'm going to maybe ask about which one I should probably apply for. But we'll think about that. We'll worry about that later. I also went to the IGDA booth. I met one of the representatives there. Her name is Haley. She wants to get into the industry too. She does gameplay programming, and she also runs, she's one of the e-board for the community college in Charlotte. She tried to give me some recommendations for studios who are hiring, because there's been people who are hiring but they're not advertising very well. But the one she recommended me was Web3, and I'll be honest, Web3 has such a besides the fact that like anything crypto related is just terrible, like on principle, but just also practically, crypto is so like impractical, unstable, and a financial liability that I don't think I would have a job very long. Like I'm legitimately uncertain of my future at any such a studio, and I don't want to work for a startup already. I already am working for one who I have more faith in being around in 5 years than a crypto studio. So pass on that, though I appreciate the heads up regardless. Here's the business card. We'll put that here. I also got an IGDA card. I picked one up. Here it is. Put that there. It's not quite a business card. The last thing I did before heading back here was I went to the NYU booth, and I met this, I'm surprised I don't have her business card. Well, we connected on LinkedIn. I made sure to send an invitation to connect with her. She followed me, but she didn't connect with me. And it's just because LinkedIn's mobile interface is obnoxious. Because the one thing you really want is put with less priority than a feature that is weird, where you can follow someone but not connect to them. It's weird. I think it's a dumb UI thing. But I talked to her about her game. I forget the name, but I know the gist of it. It's a cozy game inspired by Chinese mythology, which I think is cool. I think in the West, we don't explore a lot of Chinese mythology and folklore. And like I have some limited familiarity. Like I've looked a bit into, like there's a series by Overly Sarcastic Productions about summarizing Journey to the West. And it's been going for years. They have not finished it, but they've been doing it for a while. And they also like talking about other folk stories. And I've done a little bit of research into specifically the question of like the concept of the demigod in Chinese folklore and mythology. And the answer is, in ancient Greece, there's a lot of it's one thing like it's a different thing, because like there's one example of it, and the one example it's used as a conflict where being a demigod actually was a mistake that was going to get them killed. Like it's a forbidden thing. So it's what the gods mean and represent is obviously different. So what a demigod means is different, which is an understandable thing to find out. But Journey to the West is really cool and has a lot of funny bits. Lucy set described it as Chinese, or I'm paraphrasing, but like our Lord of the Rings, with the hour being Chinese, which I think is a good comparison. It's a very famous book of classical literature that is very approachable in some ways. And I find it's interesting in the ways it blends a bunch of different religions. It has a bunch of these competing religions together and plays them off each other, like the bureaucracy of traditional polytheist religion with Taoism, and then Buddhism being the true, wise, enlightened religion that ends up reigning supreme philosophically throughout the book, from what I understand. Either way, sorry for that tangent, but it highlights there's a lot of potential for good stuff to explore in the West. Like, anime does this all the time, which makes sense because, like, the cultural pool it's drawing from is from its cultural neighbors of China, you know, lots of stuff aesthetically that they'll crib from China from time, as China has been trying to develop its own cultural animation footprint, which I think with stuff like Scissor 7, I think is interesting to see. As much as I didn't fall in love with Scissor 7 when I first watched it, but I respect it a fair bit. But yeah, so with that, man, she's at NYU, been working on this game for 6 months, so it hasn't taken that long. I've already gotten pretty far, which is really good. It looks quite good. I love it looks like, it's supposed to look like traditional art a bit, like that watercolor with clear ink stroke kind of style in places, like in the maps. And it's basically a game about building up houses and stuff. But yeah, she was very nice, very fun to talk to. I wish her the best with her endeavors. They made something pretty cool, and I think that's a theme, I would say, for a lot of things I've seen. Including the next one I played. So I saw a friend of mine again. I saw Julian Quinn and Satchel Quinn, and I spoke with Julian again briefly, which is cool to run into him again. But before that, I played this game called Fish Gun, and one of the developers on it, I got a card from Nicole, one of the developers on it, and I played the game, and I think it's quite good. I think it had a clear, surreal aesthetic, but the main gist of it is you have a fish gun, and you boomer shooters slide around shooting things, fast movement, has some movement tech. But the big gimmick is that when you pick up your healing, you can pick up healing orbs, which can heal you, or you can throw them to do damage. And when you eat them, they give you weird properties. Like, they can make it so that you have vertical spread, or things bounce off walls, or they move slower, or what have you. And you have to work with these new alterations. And it was fun. I had a good time with that one. And that's about everything. Oh, one last thing, I also went to the Portugal booth to play, I think it's called Exodus, which is the FPS made in Game Maker. which that might raise some eyebrows, but it's a Wolfenstein kind of FPS, like Wolfenstein 3D, where it's 3D, but mathematically not 3D at all. So it's essentially using similar tricks where it's top down in Game Maker view, and you make everything, you treat everything like it's 3D through clever math. I actually have a member on my team who has done 3D stuff in Game Maker before, so I'll have to talk to them about it. But it was fun. It was cool. The sensitivity is a bit weird, but that's a common FPS problem. I would argue it's a common FPS problem. Like when I played Call of Duty, or when you play something like Overwatch or Team Fortress, playing on a mouse is easier than playing on a controller. It still works pretty well. The flow is good. It feels good. Besides sensitivity, nothing that's obviously like bad. There's one thing I should have mentioned. I should have talked about. There's an awkwardness where there's a mechanic where if you hold this bumper and you dash with this, you dash here, so you have to hold this bumper, and then if it gives you an alternate fire here. So like controlling it while dashing is a little awkward, but not ridiculous. Like, it's not impossible, just a little weird. But I don't think that could be fixed, because like rebinding it, I don't know if there's any free buttons, but the problem with rebinding it is that I don't know, I would have to play it more and think about it, but that's the only other thing. But otherwise, really good. I love the color palette. It's like neon, bright neon blue and pink magenta contrast, like that 80s vibe that everybody likes. It's a great color scheme, tried and true, but it works here. It recreates the effect of Wolfenstein very well in Doom. It does exactly what it wants artistically, and I highly, I love that. So I believe I did give him my business card. I'm gonna go look through the business cards so I can get the name of the game. Luckily, these are in chronological order. Exophobia, that's the name. This is what the game looks like. So give that one a shot if you like boomer shooters. I feel like it might be a fun separate vlog to like go through each of these games and play them and give my thoughts more completely. Like the games that are about to be released. That would be fun, but let's not worry about that. Anyway, I should probably get going. I should at least start working on my resume. I mean, I was going to say business card. Yeah, I need to start working on my resume alterations. And then tomorrow, hopefully, I'll get a good look over of my portfolio before I head over and learn what needs improvement and what works. It's not a complicated portfolio, so it should be easy to review. Anyway, I will see everybody for the final vlog, which will probably be once I get home from GDC, like last year. We'll do a late night one again. Anyway, good night, good evening, and I'll see you tomorrow.